Earlier today, my best friend Lisa and I took the children and dogs and walked in the woods. It was something we did quite often when we wanted to get away from the hustle and bustle of things. The wood, in the southern part of the UK, was a familiar escape for us, a place where the kids could run free, the dogs could obtain exercise, and we could inhale the crisp autumn air. But the second we arrived, I could feel something was wrong. Our two dogs, Scout and Daisy, were both tense in a way they shouldn't be. Their ears twitched at noises we couldn't detect, and their behavior made me uneasy. But I wrote it off as the usual liveliness of the woods playing tricks on their senses. Lisa's 7-year-old twins, Noah and Ellie, darted ahead on the path, laughing as they ran. The trail in the woods splits into two paths, one that winds its way up the hill and another that stays low, following the bottom of the valley. Lisa and I stayed on the lower path, while the twins, who were full of energy, ran up the steep hill to see what was on the higher path. Lisa's dog, Scout, was hot on their heels. When the twins reached the top, they shouted down to us that they heard the pigs. It wasn't unusual. Wild pigs were plentiful in these woods, but their voices were soon followed by silence. Lisa and I shouted up to them, expecting to hear their voices, but all we heard was the wind rustling through the leaves. A creeping fear took hold of the two of us. There was no trace of the twins. Lisa's voice cracked as she yelled out their names again and again, her desperation growing with each unanswered call. She was desperate to reach them and attempted to climb up the bank to the upper path, but the ground was loose and crumbled away beneath her feet. And then, from the bottom of the valley, a sound pierced the stillness. It was a dog screaming, a horrible, guttural cry of pain that made my blood run cold. Lisa stopped, her eyes wide with fear as she thought it was Scout who was screaming. She set off at once towards the valley, intent on rescuing her dog. Before she could descend, I caught motion out of the corner of my eye. Scout emerged from the trees, safe and walking toward us from the direction the twins had left. Lisa was flooded with relief, but it was short-lived. No sooner was Scout with us than the terrible din in the valley abruptly stopped. Seconds later, a woman appeared at the top of the hill. She called out to us, her voice calm and even, to tell us that the twins were making their way towards the entrance of the woods. Her words were a glimmer of hope, and Lisa did not waste any time. She shouted a quick thank you and took off running to find her children. I turned back up towards where the woman had been standing, but she was gone. There was no sign of her, no footprints, no movement through the trees. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. Lisa and I exchanged a confused glance, but before we could process what had just happened, a loud rumbling noise was heard from the same direction. Out of the trees, a large group of deer, at least a dozen, maybe 50 of them, came thundering down into the valley. Their hooves pounded the earth so forcefully that it rattled the ground at my feet. Lisa didn't stick around to see what would happen next. She turned and ran for the edge of the woods, determined to get back to her twins. I stood where I was, holding my 4-year-old daughter and holding both dogs close to me. Continuing to walk, I heard more rustling in the valley. 5 deer emerged from the underbrush, running in the same direction as the large herd. My daughter watched them with wide eyes, her fascination momentarily distracting me from the pain that had settled deep in my chest. And then, a second noise drifted up from the valley, a mechanical, ringing sound, like an old-style telephone. It was far away at first, but as I moved, the sound grew louder, more insistent. I stopped, scanning the trees for any sign of movement, but there was none. The dogs grew agitated, pulling on their leashes and glancing nervously behind us. I felt a cold fear wash over me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was making that sound was trying to come between me and my daughter. I tightened my hold on her hand and quickened my step, refusing to look back. As we rounded the final bend, I saw Lisa on her knees beside Noah and Ellie. I experienced a surge of relief that was immediately tempered by the appearance of the twins. They were white, obviously traumatized, and hung onto their mother as if they'd just wakened from a nightmare. Later, while we were walking back to the car, the twins told us what had happened. They told us that they were singing while walking because every time they paused, they heard twigs snapping and leaves cracking around them. But no matter how hard they looked, they could not see anyone. They explained that they encountered a woman along the way who looked familiar, but they couldn't quite remember where they'd seen her. Her face, they explained, was strangely smooth and shiny, almost as if it wasn't real. She said they should head back in the direction of the entrance, and despite feeling a sense of unease, they did as she said. Lisa and I were quiet, staring at each other anxiously. The twins' description of the woman didn't match anyone we knew, even though they mentioned that she looked like someone at their school. They also mentioned that they heard us calling them and they called out, but Lisa and I did not hear their voices. While returning home, I replayed the day's strange events in my mind. Whatever we discovered in that forest was unexplainable. The unexplainable noises, the strange woman, and the choking sensation of fear, all of it was a sign of something we couldn't understand. We afterwards read an article about a phenomenon called panic in the woods, but it was not quite what we had experienced. The woods we understood had secrets that were better left unrevealed. In the summer of 2023, my partner Jacob and I were staying at his mother's home in a small town surrounded by rolling hills and dense woods. Most evenings, after wrapping up work around 5 p.m., we'd head out to the nearby forest trails to unwind. These woods were expansive, stretching for miles, with different sections broken up by farmland and open fields. Each area had its unique charm. Some trails were narrow and winding, while others were lined with tall, thick trees that made you feel miles away from civilization. Our favorite spot was a section known as Ashburn Woods. It had become a part of our routine to walk there after work, following the same looping trail that eventually led to a clearing at the top of the hill. The trail was surrounded by trees in every direction, and we often joked about how it looked like a lopsided donut from above. On this particular evening, everything felt normal at first. We followed the familiar path, talking about our day and laughing as the gentle summer breeze rustled through the leaves above us. But as we approached a fork in the trail, one that led downhill toward a spot we called Point B, I noticed someone in the distance. The man stood still on the path, seemingly unsure of where to go. At first, I thought he might just be another hiker, but something about him seemed off. As we got closer, I noticed his odd attire. Shiny office shoes paired with a dark backpack, and in his hand, he carried a pair of hiking boots. The mix of casual and practical gear didn't make sense, especially out here in the middle of the woods. The man began walking downhill, heading toward the meeting point where several trails converged. His pace was quicker than ours, and though we tried to keep our conversation lighthearted, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling growing in my chest. By the time we reached the meeting point, he was already there, standing completely still. He didn't seem lost or confused, just waiting. His presence made both Jacob and me uneasy, and we briefly considered taking a longer route back to the car to avoid passing him. But it would have been too obvious, given that he'd clearly seen us approaching from the trail. As we got closer, my apprehension grew. I noticed the outline of something sticking out of his backpack, something that looked suspiciously like the handle of a hammer or an axe. It wasn't the kind of thing you'd carry on a casual walk through the woods. We had no choice but to pass by him. My heart pounded as we did, every step feeling like it stretched into an eternity. The man didn't say a word or even glance in our direction. Instead, as soon as we were past him, he began following us down the trail toward the car park. The sense of unease turned into outright fear. I tried to maintain a steady pace, resisting the urge to break into a run, while Jacob whispered reassurances. But even he, who was rarely fazed by anything, seemed nervous. When we finally reached the car park, it was empty except for our vehicle. We hurried to the car, locking the doors the moment we got inside. As we drove away, I couldn't bring myself to look back. For days after, I couldn't stop thinking about the man. His behavior, his silence, and the way he followed us, it all felt wrong. Jacob and I debated whether we'd overreacted or if we'd narrowly avoided something far more sinister. Then, just a week later, we attended a friend's birthday party. As the evening wore on and conversations turned to odd experiences, we shared our story. A group of women at the party who worked at a nature reserve called Maplewood Court, another section of the same hills, listened intently. One of them, Ava, revealed something chilling. She recounted an incident that had happened at her workplace around the same time. Ava had been working a closing shift at the reserve's cafe with her manager. As they wrapped up for the evening, the manager told her to leave early while he finished cleaning. Grateful for the offer, she left and headed home. Later that night, Ava received a cryptic text from her manager. "Don't come in tomorrow, just don't ask." The next day, she learned what had happened. As her manager was locking up, a man emerged from the woods and tried to steal his car keys. The manager fought back and managed to escape, locking himself in his car before calling the police. The authorities later discovered that the man was connected to another incident reported earlier that day. An elderly couple in a nearby village had been targeted during a break-in. The intruder stole several items and fled into the woods, apparently searching for a vehicle to escape the area. Even more unsettling, the police revealed that the suspect was an escaped convict from a prison hospital miles away. He had walked through the woods for days, targeting isolated spots and vulnerable people. Hearing Ava's story confirmed our suspicions. The timelines matched perfectly, and the man she described sounded eerily similar to the one we'd encountered. It was a sobering realization. Though the police eventually caught the man, the encounter left a lasting impression on us. Jacob and I still go for walks in the woods, but we're far more cautious now. The peace and tranquility we once felt have been replaced by a lingering wariness. It's a reminder that even in the most serene places, danger can be just around the corner. When I was 9 years old, in the early 1990s, my family lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Behind our backyard was a dense stretch of woods that seemed endless to me at the time. Though it wasn't large enough for someone to get truly lost, it was vast enough to feel isolated and mysterious. Small dirt trails wove through the towering trees, where squirrels darted across branches, birds sang in the distance, and rabbits sometimes peeked out from the bushes. To my friends and me, those woods were a magical world waiting to be explored. It was our escape, our playground, and the backdrop for countless adventures. Summers were spent running between the trees, playing games, and imagining we were explorers, heroes, or adventurers in some grand story. My mother let us roam freely, so long as we were back before the sun dipped below the horizon. Among all our favorite spots, one stood out the most: a massive pine tree at the heart of the woods. Its sturdy lower branches were easy to climb, and its thick upper limbs felt safe, even high above the ground. We had a name for it, though I can't recall it now. That tree became a meeting point for games, a lookout tower, and for me, a place of solitude. Whenever I wanted to escape the world, I'd climb as high as I could, sit on one of its wide branches, and let my thoughts wander. One Sunday evening, just as the golden light of the setting sun started filtering through the leaves, I decided to head out to the woods alone. I knew the day was ending, but I wanted a few more moments in my favorite tree before nightfall. I hurried through the trails, the crunch of leaves underfoot the only sound accompanying me, and soon reached the towering pine. Climbing was second nature by then. Within moments, I was perched on one of the higher branches, my legs dangling as I gazed at the horizon. The air smelled crisp, filled with the scent of pine and earth. The fading sunlight painted the woods in shades of orange and gold, and for a while, I felt completely at peace. But then, something broke the calm. A faint sound below, like a twig snapping. My eyes instinctively dropped to the base of the tree, and there he was. A man stood there, staring up at me. His appearance was unsettling. He wore a stained brown jacket that hung loosely on his thin frame, and his beard was scruffy and uneven. His hair stuck up in odd angles, as though he had been nervously running his hands through it. His expression was the most unnerving part. It wasn't just curiosity or confusion. It was a mixture of delight and fixation, like someone who had just stumbled upon something precious. For a moment, neither of us moved. My heart raced, but I stayed completely still, unsure of what to do. A voice inside me warned against screaming or moving. Something primal told me it might provoke him. After what felt like forever, he finally spoke. He asked if I was planning to come down anytime soon. The question sent a wave of fear through me. I shook my head quickly, hoping he'd take the hint and leave. Instead, he smiled, showing teeth that were uneven and yellowed. His grin wasn't warm or kind. It felt predatory, almost as if he enjoyed my fear. Then, he reached for the lowest branch of the tree. It was too thin to support his weight, but that didn't stop him from trying. He tested it with his hand, pulling slightly as though gauging whether it might hold. When the branch bent under his grip, he let go, muttering something I couldn't make out. At that moment, my fear turned into action. I screamed for help, shouting as loudly as I could. He took a step back, startled, but instead of running away, he started pacing erratically. He waved his arms and mumbled, as though arguing with someone invisible. Then, in a sudden burst of anger, he shoved the air in front of him, as if pushing an unseen person. Finally, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the trees. I stayed in the tree, paralyzed by fear, for what felt like hours. The sun had almost completely set by the time I mustered the courage to climb down. My legs felt weak, but I forced myself to run, the darkening woods blurring around me as I sprinted toward home. When I burst through the back door, gasping for breath, I told my parents everything. My father grabbed a flashlight and headed out to search the woods, but he didn't find anyone. It was as if the man had vanished. We lived in that house for another 2 years, but I never stepped foot in those woods again. What had once been a place of wonder and joy now felt sinister, even during the day. I avoided looking at the tree from my bedroom window, afraid it might remind me of that night. Even now, decades later, I think about that man. What was he planning to do? What would have happened if I had climbed down? I'll never know, and maybe that's for the best. The memory lingers like a shadow, a reminder of how quickly a safe, familiar place can change into something terrifying.